Assalamu alaikum. Like the inspiring married couple Peace Corps activists from before, I'm both American, and as a result of being American and being invited here, I feel especially privileged. I feel like I've been invited into an extraordinary family gathering. So I thank you for that, and I especially thank Zaid Abdul Hadi. And with all the Abdul Hadis behind the scenes, I think it actually is a family event, so thank you. When I was 14 years old, I had an experience that changed the course of my life. I threw a boy named Eric down the stairs at our school. It was the end of a fight that I had started. And when I look back on the event, I realized that it was actually the culmination of a lot of things that I was going through at the time that really had nothing to do with poor Eric. I was skinny and weak. And this was before Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg made it cool to be skinny and weak. Ours was the only Muslim family in town. And although I really wasn't picked on in any severe way, it was actually a wonderful town, I was made to feel different. And I took it extra personally when people made fun of my name and things like this. And as young teenage boys are prone to do, I would have these fantasies. Not those kinds of fantasies. I'd have the fantasies about turning the tables on the stronger boys, the cool boys, the athletes, you know, maybe beating one of them up in front of the people I wanted to impress. But instead of doing that, I picked on Eric, who was actually weaker and more vulnerable than me. And I don't remember his last name. I don't remember exactly his face, exactly what he looked like. But the one thing I remember so vividly, as if it just happened yesterday, is the feeling that I had as I saw him tumble down the stairs. It was not that feeling of triumph or having won anything. It was the exact opposite. I felt extreme shame. I was so embarrassed. And I think I realized at that moment that I had just done to Eric all the things that I was scared of being done to me. And I resolved right then that I would never do that to anyone ever again. And that actually set me on a path, although I didn't realize it at the time, where I got really quite engaged in a lot of bridge building efforts. I went to a Quaker college in the United States. I got engaged in mediation. I tried to start a Muslim-Jewish dialogue group on campus to discuss the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It was a disaster, and I think actually everybody left angrier than they had been when they came in, literally, but I was learning. I went on to work for organizations dealing in international peace building. I was fortunate enough to be appointed by the former Secretary General of the UN, Kofi Annan, to help lead an initiative to foster better cross-cultural relations. And over this period, I've been incredibly lucky. I've met some real heroes. I got to meet Nelson Mandela. I got to not only meet Archbishop Tutu, but work with him and develop a friendship with him. And I got to meet people who you will never hear about, but are no less courageous than those people. While I lived in Burundi in Central Africa, I worked with a man, Adrian, who survived the massacre of all the other ethnic Hutus at his university simply because he was sick that day and didn't go to university. How did he respond? He went back to school, he got his degree, and he dedicated himself to inter-ethnic peace building. He now runs Studio Jambo, which is one of the most powerful radio outlets in Eastern Africa, which its explicit mission is to foster cross-ethnic understanding and peace building. And as I've met these people, I've been forced to really confront and ask myself, if I were challenged with the kinds of traumas and injustices that they have faced, could I respond with that much humanity? Especially the injustice. Could I respond without that instinct for revenge? I'd like to think the answer is yes, but I think we all know that you never know until you're placed in that situation, and I hope to God that I am not and that nobody here ever is. But the reason I share those stories with you is because as I've gotten into this work, I've become convinced that this is actually the essential question for humankind as a whole, not just my own question about my own mortality and morality. I think this is the central question that's going to determine whether we're going to be able to thrive and prosper together and solve the problems that we talk about at events like TED, which increasingly can only be solved through cooperation across great differences and different cultures, or whether we're going to go the other route and continue to tear ourselves apart. Now, we can take great hope in at least one major development that could lay the basis for a great deal of cooperation. The explosion in new media technologies right now has really connected us as a human race as never before, across great distances and differences. But as I've been thinking about this more and more, I'm not so sure. Our track record as a human race is not that great on this. From the very earliest days of cavemen, the same breakthroughs that have helped to bring us together have been used to tear us apart. At the turn of the 20th century, we invented the automobile and the airplane, and we almost immediately put them to use in World War I and World War II. We have had, over the last 120 years, the invention and the explosion of the telecommunications industry, from telephones to BlackBerries to tablet computers that you're all using today. And did they usher in unprecedented international cooperation and peace? Not really. We had the bloodiest century in human history. So our track record of using connectivity to build a safer, more prosperous world, one that respects the dignity of all human beings, is not so great. Now, my work in this field and my reflections and insights in this field have really led me to where I am today. I'm the CEO of an international nonprofit organization called Solia, with headquarters in New York and our largest office in Cairo. It's founded by my good friend Lucas Welch. And at Solia, we're really preoccupied with this question: how are we going to use these new technologies that we now have at our disposal to build a better world, and not just to continue to perpetuate the violence against one another? So we're really preoccupied with young adults, because as is being proven in this region right now, young adults are always at the forefront of social change in every culture and every society, whether it's the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, the pro-democracy movements in Eastern Europe, the pro-democracy movements in this region, the civil rights movement in my country, in the United States. Young adults are always at the forefront. Older adults usually win the Nobel Prizes, but it's almost always college kids and other young adults who start the movements. And so we started looking at, well, how do young adults come into contact with one another? At least two ways. There are those fortunate enough to go on study abroad and educational exchange programs. We've heard from some of them today, extraordinary stories. Refugees going on study abroad programs and doing incredible things with what they've learned. And then there's the media, which is our other window into each other's cultures. So I want to share with you some insights we have about what's happening in each of these fields and what it means for cross-cultural relations today. The benefits of exchange are clear, and I don't need to go into them. Anybody who is engaged in a profound cross-cultural exchange experience has gotten a great deal out of it. But there are also limitations. If the world that we would like to see from exchanges looks like this, what it actually looks like is more like that. Fewer than 2% of young adults participate in study abroad or cross-cultural exchange programs. So we have an immediate problem of small numbers. And it's actually more problematic than that, because it frankly doesn't even look like that. It looks more like this. The vast majority of exchanges are happening between the United States and Europe. 60% of the exchanges funded out of the United States are with Europe, and the vast majority of the funding in Europe for exchange programs, and these are the two locations where the greatest amount of resources are going into exchanges, are for the Erasmus program, which sends young adults from one European country to another, which is great. The Erasmus Mundus program, which sends young adults from Europe to other regions, is minuscule by comparison. So what we're doing, to some extent, is building bridges that already exist. And finally, for many people, the cross-cultural exchange experience is very short-lived. After they come home, it's very difficult to follow up with them and keep those connections going. So what we get emerging as a picture of the exchange industry is one that provides incredible depth of experience and educational impact for those who participate in it, but very little breadth in terms of the numbers and the diversity of cultures that are being bridged. Now let's look at media. The benefits, especially in the explosion of new and social media, are this extraordinary access to information and the profound shift from content to conversation. From media simply pushing content out in the old days to now facilitating interaction and communication. And finally, the most obvious perhaps is the unprecedented connectivity. But there are limitations here as well. Yes, in theory, we now all can get access to many more diverse sources of information than we ever had before. In reality, we tend to subscribe to those sources of information that reinforce our pre-existing worldviews. These 4 people are all viewing a completely different world, even on the same subject matter when it's being covered. And the follower of Fox News tends not to follow CNN, let alone Al Jazeera, and vice versa. Oops, so we're living in information silos. Second, although theoretically new media and social media is enabling this shift from content to conversation, what kind of conversation is actually happening? Go to any chat room on a contentious subject, Israel-Palestine, immigrant integration, or in my country, gun control or abortion. And this is the kind of conversation you have. When it's a contentious issue, it tends to degenerate, and the most extreme voices tend to dominate. They type the fastest, they say the nasty things. You go to any comment page on Al Jazeera's website or on the New York Times website, and this is what happens. The reality is that unmoderated chat polarizes. And finally, although it's true in theory that social media networks are enabling us to connect as never before, the reality is that the social media space is polarized and siloed in many ways the same way that the real world is. You do not have a lot of social networks that link people who are very religious with those who are very secular. You don't have many that link people from one socioeconomic class with those from another socioeconomic class. You don't have many that link together those with very liberal political views with those with very conservative political views, whether within a single society like here in Jordan or just worldwide. And so we have communities of the like-minded. Now our fundamental, and what we get then as a result is a picture of the media that's the inverse of the picture of the exchange industry. Great breadth in terms of the numbers reached, but very little depth in terms of the cross-cultural understanding and breakthroughs that are being enabled. Now our fundamental insight at Soliya is that we want to combine the breadth of new media technologies with the depth of the cross-cultural educational exchange experience to form what we're calling Exchange 2.0. What is Exchange 2.0? Exchange 2.0 programs are programs that are technology-enabled, interactive, moderated, and based in curriculum, which doesn't mean they have to be academic. They can even be gaming, but they have a cross-cultural educational purpose. They are not simply chat rooms where you discuss whether I like Britney Spears and you like Britney Spears, as nice as that conversation could be. Now, our proof of concept that Exchange 2.0 programs work has been over the last 7 years a program we've been running called the Connect program. It's been integrated at the University of Jordan here and at universities around the world. I'll briefly describe it to you. The Connect program is a web video conferencing-based program that is integrated into college courses. So you go to your political science class or your religion class or your media studies class, and on your syllabus, in addition to the texts you have to read and the papers you have to write, there's your participation in the Connect program, which means that for 2 hours a week, for 10 weeks during the semester, as part of your accredited class, you participate in a group of peers, none of whom is from your same class, and that is facilitated. This has been spread across Europe, the United States, the Middle East and North Africa, and Southeast Asia now. The beginning of the semester in the Connect program starts with simply identity games. Let's get to know one another. Pick 5 elements of your identity that are key to who you are. Now drop 3 of them. Explain to us why you kept the 2 that you did. Just so people get to know one another and build the trust that you need to have the more difficult conversations later. And as the semester goes on, the conversation gets into more difficult social, cultural, political, religious issues. We provide video footage from Al Jazeera and the Associated Press to the students, raw footage, and we train them on how you cut this into news pieces. And their assignment for 1 week, go and cut an objective piece of this news story. Gaza, or one of the issues that, depending on where you sit, you're seeing very different news stories. And you can imagine the conversation that then ensues when the student from Texas and the student from Gaza share what they have both created with the same footage. Now, we've had huge leaps in the same 4 areas of learning that exchange programs produce: cross-cultural communication skills, critical thinking skills, empathy for one another, and inspiration, or that activation when somebody gets really excited after an exchange program and wants to go visit the other people and bring that kind of learning back into their own communities. But we stepped back 6 months ago and we said, at this rate of growth, we are not going to change the world anytime soon. And with the technologies we now have at our disposal, we should be able to. So we looked at what was out there, And we realized that we're only one of a number of leaders in this field. There's an organization called IRN, the International Education and Resource Network, which you may know. They have integrated web-based linking programs in 30,000 K-12 schools throughout the world. There's Global Nomads Group. They've been linking high schools with one another and experimenting with mobile phone technologies and gaming in order to link cultures with one another. Again, not just for gaming purposes, for the purposes of understanding one another. So just 3 days ago, these three organizations got together with the United States Institute of Peace, the Obama administration's Partners for a New Beginning initiative, which was established to try and foster better cross-cultural relations with predominantly Muslim societies, and the UN's Alliance of Civilizations, and we launched what we're calling the Exchange 2.0 campaign. I'm glad you're clapping because I'm most excited, frankly, about finding the right partners to launch here in this region. I'll tell you why in a moment. Let me first tell you what the goals and the objective of this campaign are. The goal of the campaign is simple. We want it to become the new norm that young adults have a profound international cross-cultural experience as part of their education, either part of their primary, secondary, and/or higher education. There is no reason that we can't accomplish this now. If you're not going to go on the physical exchanges, you certainly can have web-based programming linking you with other cultures so that you can learn not about one another, but with one another. Now, where we are in this process, it's a three-stage process. We are already past proof of concept. The Connect program and the learning metrics we're able to show on that. IRN's programs, Global Nomad Group's programs. There are a couple others as well. We have proven that this can actually have a profound impact, which is not a small thing to do. A lot of people doubt that you can make profound connections online. But we've been iterating our program for 7 years. These other organizations have as well, and it works. We're now at the stage of popularizing the concept, which is why I am here. In the last 4 months alone, since we started discussing this campaign, there's been an article written in the Chronicle of Higher Education, the leading academic journal, articles written by university professors, and 3 days ago, the United States Institute of Peace released the Exchange 2.0 special report, which is about to be sent to every member of the United States Congress. Why the US Congress? Because we want them, if they're going to fund Fulbright exchanges, to also fund international web-based cross-cultural exchange programs. So this is where we are. The last thing I want to share with you in terms of our strategy is what it's going to take it to scale. We see two objectives in the next 3 years. We need to enable the adoption of these kinds of programs by very large-scale partners, the industry leaders in international education and exchange, the British Council, the Institute of International Education, which runs all the Fulbright programs, some of the major networks of universities in this region, in Europe and in the United States. We want hearings in front of Congress to testify to the power of this kind of programming and to advocate for funding, and the same at the European Commission. And when we can find the right forum in this region, we want to do the same here. Finally, we want to build up the capacity of these big players to integrate these programs independent of us. And within the next year and a half, we would like to identify at least 2 places in this region where the political leadership wants to see this happen for their young adults, where the education industry is interested in making these connections happen, and where the private sector is interested in seeing this happen. And frankly, perhaps most important, where young adults are beginning to demand that these connections be made for them. A part of the reason that we're so excited about this region is it's evident that right now, at this time in history, young adults in this region, in the Middle East and North Africa, are stepping up to their rightful place of demanding a voice and demanding a lead role in social change. And we think by providing those links with the outside world, we will keep that flame going, and they will also inspire their peers around the rest of the world. And finally, we think if we can go from this reality to this reality, we will have taken the biggest step yet in generations towards a more peaceful world. That's the idea of Exchange 2.0, and that's an idea we think is worth sharing. Thank you.